Part 1 At the shape of authority. The first thing one notices is not the sound, but the silhouette. A straight, cold line of steel held against the soldier's chest, compact and deliberate, stripped of unnecessary ornament. The MP40 did not try to impress with elegance, it commanded attention through purpose. In the grey light of a European dawn, as fog clung low to the ground and boots pressed into damp earth, this weapon became more than metal. It became identity. The soldiers who carried it disciplined, synchronized, moving with mechanical precision were not just individuals. They were extensions of a system that valued efficiency above all else. And the MP40 fit that doctrine perfectly. It was a weapon born from necessity, shaped by the lessons of the past. The chaos of trench warfare in the First World War had taught the Germans a brutal truth: close combat demanded speed, portability, and firepower in tight spaces. By the time the Second World War erupted, the MP40 stood ready, not as a revolutionary invention, but as a refined answer. Chambered in 9mm, firing at a controllable rate, it allowed soldiers to move, to react, to dominate urban environments and narrow corridors where rifles felt clumsy and slow. But the MP40 was more than a technical solution. It carried with it a psychological weight. Civilians who saw it did not analyze its engineering, they felt its presence. It symbolized occupation, control, inevitability. The sound it produced, the short bursts of automatic fire, was distinct, unsettling, almost rhythmic. It echoed through streets, through shattered buildings, through memories that would last long after the war ended. To the soldiers who held it, it offered confidence. It was reliable, simple, effective. There were no illusions about what it was designed to do. In the hands of a young man far from home, standing in a foreign land under orders he barely questioned, the MP40 became both tool and companion. Cold to the touch in winter, hot after sustained fire, always there, always ready. In that early light, before the first shots were fired, before the chaos unfolded, the weapon rested quietly. But even in silence, it carried the promise. Not of glory. Not of honor. But of what was to come. Part 2 Engineering for War. There is a certain honesty in the way the MP40 was built. No unnecessary curves, no decorative flourishes, only function. It was a product of industrial thinking, a weapon designed not just for performance, but for mass production. In the factories of wartime Germany, where time was measured in urgency and materials were carefully rationed, the MP40 emerged as a solution that balanced cost, efficiency, and reliability. Unlike earlier firearms that relied heavily on machining, the MP40 embraced stamped steel. This was not merely a design choice, it was a strategic decision. Stamping allowed faster production, reduced manufacturing complexity, and enabled Germany to arm more soldiers in less time. Every rivet, every weld, every fold in the metal told a story of adaptation under pressure. The folding stock was another defining feature. It allowed the weapon to be compact, easily carried in vehicles, ideal for paratroopers and mechanized infantry. In the tight confines of armored personnel carriers or during rapid movements across contested terrain, this flexibility mattered. Soldiers could move quickly, deploy efficiently, and transition into combat without hesitation. Yet, like all tools shaped by compromise, the MP40 had its limitations. Its magazine, holding 32 rounds, was prone to feeding issues if not handled correctly. Soldiers were trained not to grip it improperly, to respect its quirks, to understand its behavior. In war, small details could mean the difference between survival and death. Despite these imperfections, the MP40 earned a reputation for reliability in harsh conditions. Mud, snow, dust environments that would cripple more delicate systems were challenges it could endure. It was not flawless, but it was dependable, and in war, dependability is often the highest form of excellence. There is something deeply human about this balance between strength and flaw. The MP40, like the soldiers who carried it, was not perfect. But it functioned. It endured. It did what it was designed to do, again and again, in conditions where failure was not an option. Part 3. The sound of close combat. War changes its nature when distance disappears. When the battlefield narrows from open fields to alleyways, from strategic lines to individual rooms, the sound of combat becomes intimate. It is no longer the distant thunder of artillery or the echo of rifles across a valley. It becomes immediate, sharp, and personal. And in those moments, the MP40 found its true purpose. Inside a crumbling building, where walls were cracked and debris littered the floor, the weapon came alive. A short burst, a controlled, deliberate attack could clear a room. The recoil was manageable, the rhythm steady, allowing soldiers to maintain control even under pressure. It was not about spraying bullets blindly, it was about precision within chaos. The sound it produced was unmistakable. Not as rapid as some other automatic weapons, but distinct enough to be recognized instantly. It carried a certain cadence, a pattern that echoed through corridors and stairwells. For those on the receiving end, it was a signal, a warning that danger was not approaching, but already there. In urban warfare, where visibility was limited and every corner concealed uncertainty, the MP40 gave its user an advantage. It allowed for quick reactions, for adaptability, for survival in environments where hesitation could be fatal. But it also intensified the brutality of conflict. Close combat leaves little room for abstraction. It forces confrontation, strips away distance, and exposes the raw reality of violence. For the soldier, this proximity changed everything. The enemy was no longer a distant figure, he was a presence, a movement, a shadow just beyond the doorway. The MP40 became an extension of instinct, responding to tension, to fear, to the immediate need to act. And when the firing stopped, the silence that followed was heavier than before. It carried with it the weight of what had just occurred, a moment compressed into seconds, yet leaving an imprint that would last a lifetime. Part 4. Faces behind the steel. It is easy to speak of weapons in terms of design, performance, and impact. But behind every MP40 was a human story. A young soldier, often barely out of adolescence, standing in a place far removed from the life he once knew. The weapon he carried was not just a tool, it was a constant reminder of the role he had been given, the expectations placed upon him, and the reality he could not escape. Some held it with confidence, trained to trust its reliability. Others gripped it tightly, not out of familiarity, but out of fear. War does not grant equal comfort to those who fight it. For many, the MP40 became a source of reassurance in an environment defined by uncertainty. It was something tangible, something they could control when everything else felt unpredictable. Yet, it also carried a burden. Every shot fired was a decision, whether conscious or instinctive. In the chaos of battle, where adrenaline blurred thought and reaction became automatic, the weapon acted quickly. But afterward, in quieter moments, when the noise faded and the mind returned to clarity, those actions lingered. There were soldiers who saw it as a symbol of duty, of loyalty to a cause they believed in or were told to believe in. There were others who saw it simply as a means to survive, to make it through another day. And there were those who, over time, began to see it as something heavier, an object tied to experiences they could never fully explain or forget. The MP40 did not choose its bearer. It did not distinguish between belief and doubt, courage and fear. It was impartial, serving whoever held it, performing its function without question. But the stories attached to it were anything but neutral. Each scratch on its surface, each worn edge, each trace of use carried fragments of those stories. Not all of them were visible. Many remained hidden, embedded in memory, in silence, in the unspoken wait that followed long after the war ended. Part 5: A symbol of occupation. In occupied territories, the MP40 became more than a weapon. It became a symbol. Its presence in the hands of German soldiers represented authority, control, and the imposition of power over unfamiliar lands. It was seen in streets where foreign boots marched in unison, in checkpoints where identities were questioned, in moments where tension hung heavy in the air. For civilians, the sight of the MP40 was often enough to alter behavior. Conversations hushed, movements slowed, eyes avoided contact. It was not necessary for it to be fired to have an effect. Its mere existence in that context carried meaning. It signaled that resistance would be met with force, that boundaries were enforced not just by words, but by the readiness to act. Children who saw it might not understand its mechanics, but they understood its presence. It was associated with uniforms, with commands spoken in unfamiliar accents, with a sense of unease that settled into daily life. Over time, it became part of the landscape of occupation, a constant reminder of a reality imposed from outside. For those who resisted, the MP40 represented something else. It was an obstacle, a threat, but also a target. Capturing one was not just a tactical gain, it was symbolic. It meant turning the tools of control against those who wielded them. In the hands of resistance fighters, the weapon carried a different meaning, one shaped by defiance rather than authority. But symbols are complex. They do not belong solely to one narrative. The MP40, in its simplicity, became intertwined with multiple perspectives, each shaped by experience, by position, by the roles individuals were forced to play. In the end, it was not just a piece of equipment. It was a presence. And for many, it became a memory that would never fully fade. Part 6: A decline and legacy. As the war progressed, the tide began to shift. The environments changed, the strategies evolved, and the dominance once associated with certain weapons and tactics began to fade. The MP40 remained in use, still reliable, still effective in close combat, but it was no longer a symbol of unstoppable momentum. It became one element among many in a conflict that was growing increasingly complex and desperate. New challenges emerged. Opposing forces adapted, developed their own strategies, their own tools. The battlefield expanded beyond the conditions where the MP40 had once excelled. Open terrain, extended engagements, and changing dynamics required different approaches. The weapon did not become obsolete overnight, but its role began to shift. After the war, the MP40 did not simply disappear. It found its way into history, into collections, into studies of military design. It became an object of analysis, of reflection, of understanding. Engineers examined its construction, historians considered its impact, and those who had encountered it on either side of the conflict remembered it in ways that extended beyond its technical specifications. There is a tendency to separate objects from the events they are part of, to view them in isolation. But the MP40 resists that separation. It is tied to a specific time, a specific context, a specific set of experiences that cannot be fully detached from it. Its legacy is not defined solely by its effectiveness or its design. It is shaped by the roles it played, the environments it existed in, and the lives it intersected with. It stands as a reminder of how tools, when placed within certain circumstances, can become symbols, carriers of meaning far beyond their original purpose. Part 7: A echoes that remain. Long after the last shot was fired, long after the uniforms were folded away and the fields returned to silence, the echo remained. Not in the air, but in memory. The MP40, once a tool of immediate action, became something quieter, yet no less powerful, a symbol carried forward through stories, through images, through the fragments of history that refused to disappear. There is a stillness in looking at such an object today. It no longer moves, no longer fires, no longer serves the purpose it was designed for. And yet, it holds within it the weight of everything it has been part of. It is a reminder of a time when the world was shaped by conflict, when individuals were drawn into roles they did not choose, when decisions made in moments of intensity left marks that lasted a lifetime. To understand the MP40 is not simply to understand a weapon. It is to confront the reality of the era it belonged to. To see beyond the steel, beyond the mechanics, and to recognize the human experiences intertwined with it. The fear, the determination, the uncertainty, the loss, all of it exists within the silent presence of that object. And perhaps that is where its true significance lies. Not in its ability to fire, but in its ability to remind. To remind us of what happens when conflict defines a generation. To remind us that behind every instrument of war, there are stories so complex, human, and often difficult to reconcile. As the screen fades to black, as the final image lingers just a moment longer than expected, there is no need for explanation. The silence speaks for itself. And in that silence, the echo remains.